Hey, welcome to part 2. So we find multiple references to Mary Magdalene, both on the exterior and the interior of the Notre Dame. And over here, you're able to see that the Mary Magdalene is connected to not just the Tower of Migdal, the Tower of the Flock, but also the Tower of Seven in Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel. You can read more about these details in the article. And that Building 7 in the World Trade Center, which was taken down alongside the 9/11 attacks, was representative of Mary Magdalene. So here you see the eye-shaped island in the center of the Seine with the Notre Dame Church. Still, the spire is still attached over here. And this is the same view from the top down, the eye-shaped island in the center of the Seine, the river attributed to the goddess Isis. And this is one of the pictures of the apostles being removed prior to the fire. And this is a depiction of the spire which was taken down. So this is one of the apostles. All of them were decapitated before being removed, quote-unquote, coincidentally, a few days before the fire. And here they all sit in a repository. So in the article which is linked inside this text, you can read in large detail how Michel played an important role in that ritual of the taking down of the spire of the Notre Dame, where we see that scene returning in the iPad code. So the destruction of the spire preceding the destruction of the church at large, and the coming out of the Antichrist from the portal of a church-type construct. And the reflection of the fire is seen in the glass of Michelle Obama. So that is one of the eyewitnesses that she was not just coincidentally present at the time, but she was an eyewitness of the event. So this is the ground layout of Paris is constructed as such that once a year the sun traverses through the rectangular building called La Défense, the Defense, and the Arc of Triumph, and that is reenacted in the iPad code as well. So here is a reflection of one of the Antichrist headpieces. In the article you will find a reference to the coming beast system and the unholy trinity, with the first beast Obama, the false prophet Pope Francis, and William will most likely, according to my understanding, reenact the role of the Antichrist sun type. Coming out of that church type structure at the time where the sun will be next to Scorpio, and that is where we find the sun as we speak. Here is a reference to the pyramids of Giza, and that's going to come into play a little bit later on as well, in addition to a tip of a spear or a needle type construct. We know that will play a part in the RNA and DNA contaminated vaccinations, ultimately also most likely at the time of the mark of the beast. So there is an epic battle in the heavens which they are reenacting between the Scorpio, which is part of the constellation Libra, biblically the altar of redemption, and on the other hand the strong arm of Orion, and that is what is being depicted in this celestial scene. So when Orion is in the sky, the constellation Scorpio is below the horizon, and vice versa. So that is what is being depicted over here. This is a rendering of the constellation Orion with the slain lion and the club. And that's going to come into play because there's a comet right now which is in the belt of Orion and will progress to the left arm, the shoulder of the constellation Orion. And over here you can see the rising of Orion and the setting of Scorpio. So this is the comet is going to be covered in more detail a little bit later. But on the 14th of November, so right after the meeting in Paris, Comet Atlas, Atlas means burden bearer, it refers to Jesus, will be at perigee, meaning closest to the Earth, and it will be aligned with the belt stars of Orion and then progress to the shoulder of Orion. So like a double-edged sword, while the world elite are speaking of peace and security and a future post-COVID in Paris, the city of light, under a guise of their false hidden bride, they will also discuss the splitting of the apple of God's eye in the United Nations Big Apple venue in New York. So there is a virtual event, the International Parliamentarians and the Palestine Question, taking place at that same time. And in the notes linked over here, you can find more details about the splitting of the apple of God's eye, how that relates to the coming Antichrist, to the location of New York, and how that is depicted in the iconic movie, The iPad Goat. So on November 11th, there is more enemy signaling because it also has ties to the Armistice Day on November 11th. There was a false armistice announced on November 7th prior, and then the real armistice was on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And there's also ties with the Mayflower Compact, and interestingly, there's a tie to Alice in Wonderland and Saint Martin of Tours, and that is also used in the iPad Go signaling as the moment of the bridal escape. So November 11th is a traditional feast day tied to the Bishop Martin of Tours. That is also connected to Trafalgar Square. And the elite are using that moment, that coming together of the narrative of Alice in Wonderland and Saint Martin of Tours, because the church located in that movie scene is that moment of the bridal escape. You can read more about that in these articles linked over here. And if we go back even further in history, there are even deeper ties between the dedication of the U.S. to the Lord on 11/11. There are ties with King Arthur, ties with Prince William, and there are ties with Stargate 1111 patterns. Many people have seen these consecutive numbers of 1111, and it's also tied to the doorway into the Temple of Solomon. So if in between the outer court and the inner court there were two double pillars, so 1111 also is reflective of the doorway to the Temple of Solomon. So if we look at the heavens on November 11th, we will find the belt stars aligning with Comet Atlas, the burden bearer. The burden bearer is also the light bearer because the Lord says that his burden is light. So the burden or light bearer comet, Comet Atlas, we find a reference to the burden bearer in Matthew 11. It arrives in Orion, and Orion is the constellation of the coming prince, the mighty, or the branch, who has overcome the lion. He has a slain lion in his left hand. And the constellation is also formed as a cup. So the form of the constellation is reflective of a royal cup. And that is distorted by the elite in their Grail Code narrative. You can read more about it over there. So we find the bell stars of Orion over here, and Comet Atlas will align with these belt stars on November 11th and 12th, and then progress more northward to the left shoulder star of the constellation Orion. So here you see the three belt stars, you see Comet Atlas, and it will progress from the belt stars to the star in the left arm of that constellation. So here you see a how do you say it, line rendition of the constellation Orion, because the belt stars on the one hand point to Sirius, and on the other they point to the Hyades cluster, that is the set apart, those believers who representing the believers who have come out of the churches, the Pleiades. And if you go a little bit further, it points to the Pleiades, the 7 churches as well. So the Pleiades are in the backside of Taurus, the bull. The Hyades cluster is at the front side in the head of the bull, and the belt stars, Sirius, Hyades, and the Pleiades align, and that will be coupled by Comet Atlas. So Comet Atlas will come into alignment with this line over here. So we find in the book of Revelation how John reveals that the 7 stars represent the 7 churches. So the earthly representation of the Pleiades is over here, and we just had a great shaking going on with the 7 magnitude earthquake on the Isle of Patmos right before the 7 churches. And there are a couple of references to the heavenly signs in Scripture, in particular the constellation Orion. One of them we find in the book of Job, another in the book of Amos. And here you see the constellation Orion's asterism, so the line between the main stars. We can see that it is formed just like a royal cup. And the Comet Atlas will line up with the holding section of that cup, and then it will progress to the edge of the cup. And this construct is often misused by the elite and covered in their artistic renderings. So they hide what they know about the constellations, and they understand from it in plain sight underneath artistic renditions such as this one. So Isaiah 13 speaks explicitly of the destruction of Babylon, and we know that America Babylon is on the verge of being judged by the Lord, in addition to the rulers of Jerusalem. So Isaiah 13 speaks of the destruction of Babylon and the onset of tribulation, the day of the Lord coming. Verse 10 specifically points to the dimming of the constellation of Orion. Verse 10, for the stars of heaven and the constellations, and the word for constellation, Kesil, listed over here, means Orion. So, for the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. So this is a veiled reference to the constellation of Orion dimming before tribulation, day of the Lord coming. If we progress into that chapter, verse 19 ties the destruction of Babylon to that of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that is covered in these Torah readings Vayera, which are designated for this week. I understand the USA Babylon to be a modern representation thereof. So, verse 19, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's a direct tie-in between the destruction of modern Babylon according to the pattern of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we can see reflected in the heavens how the constellation Orion is now highlighted by the Lord. The belt stars of Orion are a reflection of the Giza pyramids on Earth. The Giza pyramids are used by the elite in their predictive programming. We just saw that in the narrative of the iPad goat. And actually, if you put a little bit more research into it, you can find that the Giza pyramids have everything to do with Enoch. Enoch, who informed and warned and passed his mantle on to Noah to protect him and guide him during the flood. And likewise, like Noah did back then, we are informing and warning and instructing the people who are left behind after us in a similar way. That is going to be the topic of the third video. Hope to see you there.